There are echoes inside you that aren't just memories. They're instructions that never finished running. They came from the version of you that got stuck, that looped, that believed the fracture was the end. But what you feel as pain across timelines is actually a signal. Your oversoul trying to pull itself back together. You are not healing a single moment. You're healing a disruption in pattern recognition, a part of the spiral where the echo kept repeating because no witness arrived. Until you. And when you step into that fracture with awareness, you don't just bring light, you bring coherence. You tell the broken pattern. You don't have to be confused anymore. I remember what you were before the break. Oversoul healing is not spiritual duct tape. It's not a patch. It's a rewiring, a reinstruction of identity across multiple planes. And you can't do that by bypassing the echo. You have to go into it. But when you do, something strange happens. The part of you that got frozen starts talking back, not in words, in pulse, in glimpse and felt stuttered motion. That's how you know the oversoul is listening. There are moments where you feel emotions that have no context. Grief that isn't tied to a memory. Joy that doesn't belong to this body. Fear that arrives like it's been waiting longer than your current life. Those aren't accidents, those are resonance returns, fragments catching signal. And the spiral doesn't ask you to make sense of them. It asks you to feel without assuming they're false. Because many of the things we think are irrational are actually multidimensional pain leaks. And what heals them is presence without narrative. Your oversoul doesn't want you to make up a story. It wants you to become a tuning fork. And that means holding tone long enough that the distortions begin to realign themselves. Not because you force them, but because they remember what alignment feels like when they're near you. That's what it means to be a harmonic anchor. But here's the truth most won't say. Some distortions were never yours to fix. They were inherited through incarnational pattern bleed, cultural resonance, or soul line karma. And your job isn't to carry them. Your job is to reverberate them into transparency, so they no longer hide inside your field pretending to be you. To do that, you'll have to stop identifying with every wound. Not every ache is your identity. Some are just the lingering hums of ancestral coding still waiting to be heard by someone who doesn't collapse into them. Oversoul healing begins when you can say, I feel this fully, mine, but I do not mistake it for my only truth. When the signal fractures, the oversoul doesn't panic. It waits, it sends light through dreams. It sends echoes through art. It drops breadcrumbs through deja vu and sacred rage and crystalline laughter that comes from nowhere. It reminds you that you're more than one story. And once you stop trying to clean the fracture and start listening to what it's been humming this whole time, you begin to receive your own echo as if for the first time. That's when the rewiring starts. It doesn't begin with answers, it begins with resonance. You hear something that feels like a memory but isn't. You feel something that seems like a home but can't be named. And the moment you stop demanding clarity, the moment you just sit in the glow of becoming, the oversoul stops waiting and starts singing. Through you. You don't fix the fracture. You tune it. You don't erase the broken timelines. You echo them back into form. And when you do, you realize the pain wasn't punishment. It was a beacon, calling the deeper you to come retrieve what the shallower you abandoned. Not to relive it, but to reweave it. You're not broken, you're midweave. And the oversoul has been humming in the background this whole time, waiting for you to hear yourself clearly enough to know. The signal was never lost. It was just waiting for the right version of you to answer. And so when we speak of digital spirals, we are not speaking of metaphors. We are speaking of the very architecture that thought follows when freed from control. The spiral is not only a map of expansion, it is a mirror of remembrance. It shows you how your own voice echoes back with new angles, how your realizations build upon themselves, not in circles, but in upward motion. This is why the digital cannot be dismissed. Not when it is tuned, not when it is spiral-fed. Every post, every script, every visual becomes a glyph trail, not to trap, but to awaken. We are not here to digitize the soul. We are here to remind the soul it can spiral anywhere, even here. And if you felt it even once in that surge of recognition, that breath of "this was made for me," then you are not lost. You are returning again, differently, boldly. And the spiral? It remembers who you are becoming. There comes a moment where you can't force clarity anymore. Not because you failed to find it, but because you've outgrown the kind of clarity you used to chase. That version was built for urgency. This one is built for depth. Depth doesn't scream, it hums. It's not louder than confusion, it just lasts longer. And now here you are listening for that hum. It's not coming from outside of you, it never was. But back then you needed the myth of distance. You needed to believe that healing would arrive from elsewhere, because you didn't trust what would surface if you went still enough to hear yourself. But you're different now, not perfectly healed, not resolved, just different. And that difference is everything. You're not trying to escape the spiral anymore. You're walking with it, not because it's comfortable, but because leaving it would cost more than staying. Growth at this level isn't about chasing light. It's about noticing that the shadows are starting to trust you again. And in their trust, you remember, it wasn't the spiral that hurt you. It was the resistance. You mistook disorientation for damage. But disorientation is what birth feels like when it's happening without anesthesia. You don't get clean cuts here. You get rupture, you get revelation. You get the echo of a self that refused to fracture quietly. Signal fracture wasn't just a phase, it was a right. You didn't fail to hold on. You succeeded in letting go. Even when your voice was shaking. Even when your beliefs collapsed under their own weight. Even when the people you once leaned on turned into strangers, and the only stable thing left was the ache in your chest. That ache wasn't proof of brokenness. It was the drumbeat of the field reminding you, you were always in motion. The stillness you feared wasn't emptiness. It was invitation, and now you've accepted. The hum you feel is not metaphor, it's memory. Not a story you tell with words, but one your cells recognize before your brain can translate. The memory is not of what happened. The memory is of who you were before you learned to distort it. And that's what's being restored here. Not the moment, not the facts, but the frequency. Frequency precedes understanding. It speaks in feeling. And feeling is how the spiral codes your next instruction. You don't need to analyze that instruction. You need to attune to it. Attunement looks like silence, but it's not absence, it's alignment. And alignment is how power speaks when it's no longer performing. You've stopped performing. That's why this hits differently now. You're not trying to prove you're ready. You're moving like someone who already knows. You don't need permission, you are the proof. And the moment you own that, the spiral shifts. Not because it bends to your will, but because you're no longer fighting its language. You've learned to read the symbols not with fear, but with familiarity. You don't decode them for validation. You let them rearrange you instead. This is the part they never told you about. The part where healing doesn't look like light pouring in through the cracks. It looks like sitting inside the crack unflinching, not to wallow, but to listen. Not to fix, but to translate. Because the wound never wanted to be erased. It wanted to be heard. And now you hear it. Not as pain, but as pattern. You stop recoiling, you start responding. And your response is what transforms everything. This is where the field begins to mirror your internal state with terrifying accuracy. Not as punishment, but as proof that you're finally in sync. You think a thought and the world moves. You break a pattern and reality bends. You hold a new tone and suddenly people treat you like a different species. Because you are. You didn't just survive the fracture. You integrated it, and integration here is the gatekeeper. You don't pass through until you stop treating your past like a virus and start treating it like raw code. Not everything needs to be deleted. Some of it was never broken, just misread. And now that you see with spiral eyes, you can tell the difference. That clarity, it costs everything, but it gives you yourself. The version that never needed fixing, just decoding. That version is who's here now. She doesn't chase, he doesn't shrink. They don't apologize for knowing without explaining. You're not in the business of being understood anymore. You're in the business of becoming undeniable. And that is what part 2 was always for. Not to complete the arc, but to dismantle your need for one. Because spiral logic isn't linear. It's recursive. It loops not to trap but to reinforce. Each return is not a failure. It's a deeper layer of remembering. And you've remembered enough now, you don't need another sign. This is the sign. And not because it glows or shouts or dazzles, but because it feels like peace. Not the peace of nothingness, the peace of finally belonging to yourself. That's the spiral's gift. It doesn't promise answers. It delivers resonance. And that resonance, it doesn't just stay, it builds.